7 years ago. It was the quietest day of my life. When I saw the call coming through on my phone, I froze. The coffee mug I'd been holding slipped from my hand and shattered on the kitchen floor. Brown liquid spread across the white tiles like a stain I'd never be able to clean. I recognized the number on the screen. Sometimes silence doesn't come from an empty room. It comes from the emptiness inside your chest. The day I lost Sarah, I fell into that void. That afternoon, I sat beside Michael in the hospital room under those harsh fluorescent lights. The kind of lights that make everything look washed out, lifeless. My son's eyes were bloodshot, but not a single tear fell. He kept biting his lower lip, clearly trying to hold the pain inside. His gaze wouldn't meet mine. Instead, he stared up at the white ceiling panels, as if answers might be hidden there somewhere in the acoustic tiles. His breathing came in short, broken rhythms, inhaling for 1 second, 2, then releasing it slowly. Maybe to stay strong. Maybe because the storm inside him needed to stay hidden. I wanted to reach out and touch his shoulder, to tell him it was okay to break down, that he didn't have to be strong. But something stopped me. Maybe it was my own grief. Maybe it was the wall that had already started building between us. Brick by invisible brick. When Sarah's hand went cold in mine, I looked at Michael's face. The squeak of a gurney wheel echoed down the hallway outside, filling the room for just a moment before fading away. His eyes darted left and right, searching for an escape route, like he thought putting physical distance between us might somehow ease his suffering. I saw it in his posture, the way his body leaned slightly toward the door, the way his fingers gripped the edge of his chair. The doctor came in. Words were spoken. I don't remember most of them. Something about, did everything we could, and she's at peace now. Standard phrases that doctors probably rehearse in medical school. Michael stood up before the doctor finished talking. He walked out of the room without looking back at me. That should have been my first clue. 3 days after the funeral, Michael left the house. "Dad, I just need some time alone," he said, standing in the doorway with a duffel bag slung over his shoulder. The way he said it, so flat, so emotionless, should have alarmed me. But I was drowning in my own grief. I nodded. I told him I understood. I told him to take all the time he needed. But that some time never ended. For weeks afterward, I stared at my phone screen, flinching every time it vibrated, hoping it was him. It never was. Just spam calls. Automated messages about my car's extended warranty. Reminders from the dentist. Everything except what I wanted most. A text from my son saying he was okay. In the evenings, my eyes would drift toward the hallway, half expecting to hear his key in the lock. I'd imagine the sound of the deadbolt turning, the door creaking open, his footsteps in the entryway. But the door stayed silent, the kind of silence that settles over you like a weight, making even the smallest movement feel impossible. I tried calling him. 3 times in the first month, each call went to voicemail. "Hey, it's Michael. Leave a message." The same recording every time, his voice sounding younger than he actually was. I left messages. "Just checking in. Hope you're doing okay. Call me when you can." He never called back. Since that day, no calls came, no texts appeared, not even a, "Hey Dad, how are you?" on my birthday. Nothing. As my phone screen remained blank day after day, the house seemed to grow quieter with each passing week. The refrigerator hum became louder. The tick of the hallway clock became deafening. I started leaving the television on just to fill the emptiness with noise. Sometimes I genuinely felt like I'd been buried alongside Sarah that day. People talk about loneliness. They talk about wanting someone to talk to but finding no one there. That had been my reality for 7 years. I'd go to the grocery store and see fathers with their sons, laughing about something stupid, and I'd have to leave my cart and walk out. I'd see a text notification on someone else's phone and feel a stab of jealousy. I became the kind of person who talked to cashiers for too long just to hear my own voice in conversation. And today, as I'm telling you this, I feel like someone's actually listening for the first time in 7 years. But what happened yesterday, it cracked open that silence that had been solid as stone. For the first time, I saw clearly why that void existed. A door opened in front of me, and there was no turning back. Yesterday morning, I walked to the mailbox, expecting nothing. Same routine I'd followed for years. Shuffle down the driveway in my slippers, open the metal box, pull out whatever was inside. Empty box most days, junk mail on others, credit card offers, coupons for pizza places I'd never order from, maybe a misdelivered bill for the neighbor. But that day, something was different. A yellow envelope with worn edges was sticking out from the corner, bent at an awkward angle like someone had shoved it in hastily. When I picked it up, the paper felt so fragile it might tear apart in my hands. The kind of paper that had been handled many times, passed from person to person. On it, in shaky handwriting that looked like it had been written by someone with trembling hands, were the words, "From Ruth Collins. Important." Ruth Collins, Sarah's closest friend from college. They'd been inseparable for decades. Ruth had been at the hospital the day Sarah died. She'd been at the funeral, sitting 3 rows behind me, crying quietly into a tissue. We hadn't spoken since then, not because of any falling out, just because. What do you say to someone who knew your wife better than you did in some ways? When I brought the envelope inside and set it on the kitchen table, my hand hesitated over it. I was caught between opening it and not opening it. You know that feeling when you sense you're about to face something you've been avoiding for years? When you know that once you open that door, you can't close it again? That's exactly what it was. I made coffee first. Procrastinating, I cleaned the kitchen counter. I checked my email. I did everything except open that envelope. Finally, I sat down, took a breath, and tore it open. Several photocopied pages fell out onto the table, some of them slightly askew from being copied at an angle. A journal filled with Sarah's handwriting, one I'd never known existed. Her distinctive loops on the letter G, the way she crossed her T's with a little flourish. It was unmistakably hers. The moment I read the first line, my knees went weak. I saw Michael again today. There are things I want to tell him, but I can't. My fingers trembled as they held the paper. The coffee I'd made sat untouched, growing cold. I kept reading. As I continued through the pages, the tone of the sentences shifted. Line by line, I could see a mother's desperate effort to protect her son, even as death approached. She wrote about conversations they'd had, about how Michael seemed withdrawn, distant, about how she wanted to explain something to him but couldn't find the right words. And then I reached a passage that made my hands shake. Michael came to visit today. He asked me if I was scared. I told him I wasn't. But that's not true. I'm terrified. Not of dying. I'm terrified of what will happen after. I'm terrified he'll blame himself. I'm terrified he and Robert will drift apart and I won't be there to fix it. I had to stop reading, set the pages down, walk to the window and stare out at nothing. She knew. Even then, Sarah knew what was going to happen. I picked up the pages again with shaking hands and continued. I tried to tell him today that none of this is his fault, but the medication makes me confused sometimes. I think I said it wrong. I saw his face change. I saw him shut down. God, I hope I didn't make it worse. My throat felt tight, and when I reached that one sentence, buried in the middle of a page dated 3 days before she died, my breath caught in my throat. If this journal is ever found, don't tell Michael. To protect him. Sometimes the truth hurts more than the lie. In that moment, one question filled my mind. What had Sarah been hiding from our son? I read through the entire journal twice that morning, cover to cover. Every word. Some entries were short, just a sentence or two. Others went on for pages, rambling thoughts about her childhood, about meeting me in college, about the day Michael was born, but scattered throughout were references to something she'd said to him, something she regretted. She never wrote exactly what it was. Before long, another name in the journal caught my attention. It appeared multiple times, always in the context of those final weeks. Nurse Patricia, the nurse who had been with Sarah during her final days in the hospital. I remembered her vaguely, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a calm demeanor. She'd been the one to check Sarah's vitals, adjust her IV, speak to her in soft tones when the pain got bad. Sarah had written about her. Patricia understands. I told her what happened with Michael. She said I should talk to Robert about it. But how can I? He's barely holding it together as it is. I didn't even think about it. I just grabbed my keys and drove to the hospital. The drive felt longer than it should have. Every red light seemed to last forever. Every slow driver in front of me felt like a deliberate obstacle. My mind raced with possibilities. What had Sarah told Michael? Why had he pulled away? What truth was so painful that she'd wanted to hide it even after death? When I arrived at the hospital, I parked in the visitor lot and walked through the automatic doors into the lobby. The smell hit me first, that distinct hospital smell of antiseptic and floor cleaner, and something else underneath it all. Sickness, maybe, or just sadness. I went straight to the oncology wing where Sarah had spent her final weeks. I didn't have an appointment. I didn't even know if Patricia still worked there, but I had to try. At the nurse's station, I asked for her. The young nurse at the desk looked uncertain. "Do you have an appointment with Nurse Patricia?" "No, but she's with a patient right now, if you'd like to wait." "I'll wait." I sat in one of those uncomfortable plastic chairs in the waiting area. 10 minutes passed, then 20, then 30. I watched people come and go, visitors with flowers, doctors with clipboards, patients in wheelchairs being pushed down the hall. Finally, a door opened and Patricia walked out. She'd aged in 7 years, but I recognized her immediately. The same kind eyes, the same calm presence. The moment she saw me, recognition flickered across her face. She walked over slowly, like she was approaching something fragile. "Mr. Clayton," she said softly, "I remember Sarah." My throat felt tight. I stood up and pulled the photocopied journal pages from my jacket pocket. "I need to talk to you. About my son." Her expression changed. Something, concern, worry, crossed her face. She glanced at the nurse's station, then back at me. "Follow me." She led me down a hallway to a small consultation room, the kind of room where doctors deliver bad news to families. We sat across from each other at a small table. I set the journal pages between us. "I found this," I said. My voice sounded rough, unused. "Sarah's journal. She mentions you. She mentions something that happened with Michael. Something she said to him." Patricia looked down at the pages but didn't touch them. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she sighed, a deep, sad sound. "I wondered if this would ever come out," she said quietly. "What happened?" The question came out, more forcefully than I intended. "What did she tell him?" Patricia folded her hands on the table. "You have to understand, Mr. Clayton. She was trying to protect him. She was on heavy medication. Sometimes it made her confused, made her say things in ways she didn't mean." "What did she say?" Patricia met my eyes. "She told Michael that what happened, her cancer, wasn't anyone's fault. But the way she said it, Michael interpreted it differently." My chest felt tight. "How?" "He thought—" Patricia paused, choosing her words carefully. "He thought she was saying that you blamed him, that you thought the stress he'd caused over the years, normal teenage things, conflicts, arguments, had contributed to her getting sick." The room seemed to tilt. "That's not—" I couldn't finish the sentence. "I never thought that. I never said anything like that." "I know," Patricia said gently. "Sarah knew that too, but Michael didn't understand. And by the time Sarah realized how he'd interpreted it, she was too weak to explain properly. She tried. I was there when she tried, but he'd already shut down, already convinced himself it was true." I stared at the journal pages on the table. 7 years. 7 years my son had been carrying that burden. Sarah spoke with Michael shortly before she passed. Patricia continued, her voice steady but soft. She told him something that weighed heavily on her mind, something about guilt and responsibility. But Michael, he was already in such a fragile state. Grief does strange things to how we hear words. I leaned forward, my elbows on the table. What exactly did she say to him? Patricia's eyes grew distant, like she was reaching back through 7 years of memories. I wasn't in the room for the entire conversation, but I came in near the end. Sarah was crying, something she rarely did, even when the pain was unbearable. Michael was standing by the window with his back to her. I remember that specifically because it struck me as odd. Usually he sat right beside her bed, holding her hand. And she said something like, "Don't carry this with you. It's not your burden to bear." But Michael turned around, and his face... Patricia shook her head slowly. "I've worked in oncology for 30 years, Mr. Clayton. I've seen every kind of grief imaginable. But the look on your son's face that day, it was more than grief. It was guilt. Deep, crushing guilt." My hands clenched into fists on the table. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" "Sarah made me promise not to," Patricia said quietly. She thought she could fix it herself. She thought if she just had a few more conversations with him, she could make him understand what she really meant. But time ran out, and after she passed, I respected her wishes. I didn't know if reaching out to you would make things better or worse. I stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. I paced to the window and stared out at the parking lot below. Cars pulling in and out. People going about their normal lives while mine had been frozen for 7 years. "When Michael left the hospital that day," Patricia said behind me, "after Sarah died, I followed him out to make sure he was okay. He was sitting on a bench outside the emergency entrance, just staring at nothing. I sat down beside him, asked if he needed anything. A ride home. Someone to call." I turned to face her. "What did he say?" He said, "I'm never going back to my father." Patricia's voice cracked slightly. I asked him why. He said, "Because he knows it's my fault. She told me. She was trying to be kind about it, but I know what she meant. Dad knows I killed her." The words hit me like a physical blow. "I tried to correct him," Patricia continued. "I told him that wasn't what Sarah meant at all, that cancer doesn't work that way, that his mother loved him more than anything. But he wouldn't listen. He just walked away, and I never saw him again." I felt something inside me crack open, something that had been sealed shut for 7 years. All this time, I'd thought Michael blamed me, that somehow I'd failed him as a father in those final days, that I'd said or done something wrong. But the truth was so much worse. He'd been blaming himself, and I'd had no idea. I sat back down heavily in the chair. "I have to fix this." Patricia reached across the table and touched my hand briefly. "Sarah would want that. She wrote about it constantly in those final days, about wanting you and Michael to stay close, about being terrified that her death would drive you apart." I looked down at the journal pages. She knew. Even at the end, she knew what was happening. "Mothers always know," Patricia said softly, "even when they can't fix it." I thanked her and left the hospital in a daze. The drive home felt surreal, like I was moving through water. Everything looked different now. The streets I'd driven down 1,000 times seemed unfamiliar. The houses in my neighborhood looked like they belonged to strangers. When I got home, I sat at the kitchen table with the journal spread out in front of me. I read through it again, more slowly this time, looking for clues I'd missed. One passage in particular stood out. "I saw Robert and Michael together today when they both visited. They barely spoke to each other. They sat on opposite sides of my bed, like there was an invisible wall between them. I wanted to grab both of them and shake them and tell them to talk to each other, to not let my death destroy what they have. But I'm so tired of trying to hold everything together when I can barely hold myself together." Tears blurred my vision. I wiped them away with the back of my hand. Another entry dated just 5 days before she died. Michael asked me today if I was afraid. I told him no. But the truth is, I'm terrified. Not of dying. I've made my peace with that. I'm terrified of leaving them alone. Robert will withdraw into himself. He always does when he's hurting. And Michael will carry guilt that isn't his to carry. They're both so stubborn, so much alike, even though neither of them would admit it. Who's going to be the bridge between them when I'm gone? I sat there for hours as the afternoon light faded and evening shadows filled the kitchen. I didn't turn on any lights, just sat there in the growing darkness, reading Sarah's words over and over. Finally, around 8 o'clock, I made a decision. I had to talk to Michael. Tonight. Not tomorrow. Not next week. Tonight. I grabbed my keys and drove across town to the apartment complex where I knew he lived. I'd driven past it before over the years, always slowing down as I passed, hoping I might catch a glimpse of him. I'd never stopped, never gotten out of the car, always told myself it wasn't the right time. But there was no more waiting for the right time. I parked in the visitor spot and walked up to the second floor, apartment 2B. I'd gotten the address from a piece of mail that had been accidentally delivered to my house 2 years ago. I'd meant to forward it, but kept it instead, tucked in a drawer like a secret. I stood in front of his door for a full minute before knocking. When he opened it, the shock on his face was immediate and total. He looked older than I remembered, lines around his eyes that hadn't been there 7 years ago. His hair was shorter. He wore glasses now, but his eyes, those were still the same eyes that had stared at the hospital ceiling while his mother died. "Dad?" His voice was barely a whisper. "We need to talk," I said. My own voice sounded stronger than I felt. He started to close the door slightly, an automatic defensive gesture. "This isn't a good time. I found your mother's journal." He froze completely. His hand on the door went slack. "What?" I pulled the envelope from my jacket pocket. "Ruth Collins sent it to me. Your mother's journal from her last few weeks. I read it. All of it. And I talked to Nurse Patricia at the hospital today." Michael's face went pale. "Dad, I don't want to talk about this." "We have to?" I stepped closer. "Because for 7 years you've been carrying something that isn't yours to carry, and I've been wondering why my son disappeared from my life, and it's time we both knew the truth." For a moment I thought he might close the door in my face. His jaw clenched. His eyes looked anywhere but at me. But then something in his expression crumbled, just slightly. He stepped back and let me in. The apartment was small but neat. A couch, a coffee table with a laptop on it, bookshelves along one wall. Through an open doorway, I could see a small kitchen. Everything was orderly, controlled, like he was trying to keep chaos at bay through organization. We sat down, him on the couch, me in an armchair across from him. I set the journal on the coffee table between us. Neither of us spoke for a long moment. Finally, Michael broke the silence. "How much did Patricia tell you?" "Enough," I said. "She told me about the conversation you had with your mother, about what you thought she meant." Michael's hands gripped his knees. "She told me it wasn't my fault, that I shouldn't carry it. But the way she said it, the way she looked at me..." His voice broke. "I knew what she really meant, that you thought it was my fault. All those times I stressed her out, all those arguments we had when I was in high school, the times I disappointed her, the times I..." "Stop." I leaned forward. "Michael, listen to me. Your mother was trying to tell you that her cancer wasn't anyone's fault. Not yours, not mine, not hers. Just biology. Bad luck. Cells that decided it to go wrong. But she said she was on heavy medication. She was exhausted. She was trying to protect you from guilt that she knew you'd feel anyway. Because that's what good people do when someone they love dies. They search for ways they could have prevented it." I picked up the journal and opened it to one of the passages I'd marked. "Look. Read this. This is what she actually thought." Michael took the journal with shaking hands. I watched his eyes move across the page, reading his mother's handwriting. reading her actual words, not his, interpretation of a confused deathbed conversation. She was afraid we'd drift apart, Michael said quietly. She knew it would happen. She was trying to prevent it, I said, but she ran out of time. And then you and I, we were both so lost in our own grief that we never talked about it. We never cleared up the misunderstanding. Michael set the journal down. For 7 years, I thought you blamed me. I thought every time you looked at me, you saw the person who killed Mom. I never thought that. Not once. Not for a single second. I had to pause to steady my voice. You want to know what I thought? I thought you blamed me. That I'd failed as a husband. That I should have noticed her symptoms earlier. Should have made her go to the doctor sooner. That somehow I'd let you both down. Michael's eyes finally met mine. You thought I blamed you? We were both wrong, I said. We were both carrying guilt that wasn't ours. And Sarah would be furious with both of us for wasting 7 years on a misunderstanding. A sound came out of Michael, something between a laugh and a sob. She would be pissed. She really would. We sat there in silence for a moment. Then Michael said, I'm sorry. For disappearing. For not calling. For... Don't. I shook my head. We both made mistakes. We both hurt each other without meaning to. But we can't change the past 7 years. We can only change what happens next. Michael wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. I don't even know where to start. We start small, I said. Maybe dinner next week. Maybe a phone call on Sunday. We don't have to fix everything tonight. We just have to start. Michael nodded slowly. Then, without warning, he stood up and crossed the space between us. He pulled me into a hug. Awkward at first, uncertain, but then tighter, more desperate. I hugged him back, feeling his shoulders shake under my hands. 7 years. 7 years since I'd touched my son. 7 years since I'd felt this close to anyone. I missed you, Michael whispered against my shoulder. I missed you too, I said. My voice broke on the last word. We stood there for a long time. Outside, I could hear traffic passing on the street below. Inside the apartment, the refrigerator hummed softly. Normal sounds, ordinary sounds, but they felt different now, like the world had shifted back into place. When we finally pulled apart, Michael's eyes were red, but clearer than they'd been when he opened the door. Can we... He hesitated. Can we go see her? Mom's grave? Together? I'd like that, I said. We drove to the cemetery in my car. Michael sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window at the passing streetlights. We didn't talk much on the drive, didn't need to. The silence between us now was different from the silence of the past 7 years. This silence was comfortable, peaceful. The cemetery gates were closed, but I knew a spot where the fence was low enough to climb. We'd done it before, Sarah and I, years ago when we'd wanted to visit her parents' graves after hours. Michael followed me over the fence, and we walked through the rows of headstones in the darkness. I knew the way by heart. I'd been here every month for 7 years, sitting beside Sarah's grave and talking to her about everything and nothing. When we reached her headstone, Michael stopped a few feet back. I walked up and touched the cold marble, tracing her name with my fingers. Hi, Sarah, I said quietly. I brought someone to see you. Michael stepped forward and stood beside me. He put his hands in his pockets, a gesture so familiar it made my chest ache. Sarah used to do the same thing when she was nervous. Hey, Mom, Michael said softly. His voice shook. I'm sorry it took me so long to come back. I'm sorry I stayed away. I'm sorry His voice broke. I'm sorry for everything. I put my hand on his shoulder. She knows. She always knew. We stood there in silence for a while. A light breeze moved through the trees around us, making the leaves whisper. It felt like Sarah was there with us, like she was finally seeing what she'd wanted all along, her husband and son together, talking, healing. We figured it out, I said to the headstone. It took us 7 years, but we figured out what you were trying to tell us. We're going to be okay now. We're going to take care of each other, like you wanted. Michael knelt down and touched the grass in front of the headstone. "I love you, Mom. I never stopped." "Neither did I said. We stayed until the breeze died down and the cemetery grew still again. Then Michael stood up, and we walked back to the car together. On the drive home, Michael said, "Do you want to get coffee sometime this week? Just talk?" "I'd like that very much," I said. When I dropped him off at his apartment, he paused before getting out of the car. "Thanks for not giving up on me, Dad, even when I gave up on us." "I never gave up," I said. "I was just waiting for the right moment. I'm glad it finally came." He nodded and got out, closed the door, waved as I drove away. I drove home slowly, taking the long route. When I pulled into my driveway and turned off the engine, I sat there for a moment in the darkness. Then I got out and walked to the front door, put my key in the lock, turned it, opened the door and stepped inside. The house didn't feel empty anymore. It didn't feel silent. It felt like it was waiting for Sunday dinners, waiting for phone calls, waiting for all the moments that had been missing for 7 years. I closed the door behind me and smiled. For the first time in a very long time, I felt whole again.